Another case which I think reflects the tendency of the Republican majority of the court to side with corporations over people is a case called Rory against Continental Insurance Company. Now, for almost as long as anyone can remember, Michigan, like every other state in the country, had a rule when it came to those long insurance contracts that you received from your insurance company with the 50 or 60 tissue paper pages of policy attached, or the 120-page booklet you received from your credit card company containing all of the terms of your credit agreement with the company. And the rule in Michigan, like everywhere else in the country, was that courts would enforce the terms of those agreements, but only if they were reasonable. And the reason that that rule was in place is because courts understood that people don't really have a right to negotiate any of those terms with their insurance company or their credit card company, and that really you have to take the agreement that they hand you or you don't get their services. And because you're not really at what we would call arm's length with those companies, the courts have said that we're going to make sure that those terms are reasonable before we enforce them. Well, in Rory versus Continental Insurance Company, the Supreme Court of Michigan decided that that's not true anymore. That whatever is in those 50 tissue paper pages of your insurance policy or in that big book you get from your credit card company is what you're going to be stuck with, whether it's reasonable or not. And the reasoning of the Republican majority of the court, it was simply this. Everyone reads those, according to the court, and if you don't like the terms, you should call your insurance company and tell them that you would want them changed, or call the credit card company and tell them that you would want them changed. Now, we all know that's not possible, and we all know that that's not how life really is. But to the Michigan Supreme Court, the Republican majority of the Michigan Supreme Court, that's the way they apparently view life. And it's another example of them standing up for corporations and not people. Another similar case is Smith versus Globe Life. Michigan had one of the best consumer protection acts in the country. You'd be proud of it. You'd be proud of the work the legislature did. It protected Michigan residents from all sorts of deceptive practices of people who sell goods and products in the state. There was an exception in the Consumer Protection Act, and a pretty sensible one, that said that if a particular business is already regulated by the state, let's say an insurance contract, for example, and they're required to send that contract to a commission of some sort who looks at the contract to make sure it's fair before they send it to you, then they're not going to be governed by the Michigan Consumer Protection Act because they're already doing what the state tells them to do. Well, in Smith versus Globe Life, the Michigan Supreme Court decided that that rule shouldn't just apply to companies who are regulated by the state and have their conduct regulated by the state. It should apply to any company or any service that's regulated or licensed by the state. So the Consumer Protection Act now doesn't apply to anyone who has to receive a license from the state to do business, which includes auto mechanics, plumbers, barbers, carpenters, person who puts the concrete down in your driveway. None of those people are now covered by the Michigan Consumer Protection Act, and if they want to engage in deceptive practices and misleading practices, you have no remedy in court. I think if one way to look at the Republican majority of the Supreme Court is to see what they have in common in order to understand why they tend to vote so often in common on these cases. And one of the things you probably noticed earlier was that all of them began their judicial careers when they were appointed by Governor John Engler. In addition to that, all of the current members of the Republican majority of the Michigan Supreme Court, either now or at one time, belong to an organization known as the Federalist Society. And the Federalist Society was formed some 20 or 25 years ago in the hope of, with a stated effort of creating lawyers and judges who were strict constructionists, the thing we talked about earlier where you simply follow the law. And I think if you want to know what the goals of the Federalist Society are, the best way to do that is to look and figure out where the Federalist Society gets its money. And it's all available online. You can go and look, but significant funding for the Federalist Society comes once again from the Koch Foundation, which we discussed earlier is made up of the Koch brothers, who inherited from their father Koch Industries, a large mining company, who again has the longest record of violations from the EPA of any company in American history. The John Olin Foundation is also a large supporter of the Federalist Society. You may know John Olin from the chemical company out east. His father was one of the original founders of the John Birch Society. The Sarah Scaife Foundation, which is also related to the Olin Foundations but is now a separate large foundation, funds all of the organizations that you would expect, including the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, and a number of others very, very conservative think tanks. In addition, the Sarah Scaife Foundation gave $2 million to an organization called the Center for Individual Rights, which funded the case against, you may remember, to keep gays out of the Boy Scouts of America. It's essential as you go to the polls this fall, and when you talk to your friends and neighbors about going to the polls this fall, that you remember that in order to have your vote count in the Michigan Supreme Court race, you must vote the separate nonpartisan ballot. As I've given this talk, and largely to folks who are Democrats across the state, many have come up to me to say, you know, I never thought about this. I vote straight ticket, assuming that I'm voting for all of the candidates that the Democrats have endorsed, and come to find out that's not true. If you vote the straight Democratic ticket, you will not be voting for the candidates for the Supreme Court that have been endorsed by the Democratic Party. To do that, you must go to the nonpartisan portion of the ballot, which is often on the backside, and vote specifically in those races. In addition to voting in those races this fall, I believe that if we're to prevail in this fight, we need to help our friends and neighbors understand that this court sits above and sets the agenda for a justice system that impacts almost every aspect of our everyday lives, whether we know it or not. They affect every interaction we have with a bank, insurance company, or big box stores. They set the rules for our schools and our universities, for safety in the workplace, our right to be free from discrimination. The court can enhance or eliminate our ability to protect or abandon, if it chooses, the commons and the universal right we all have to clean air and water. Equally important is its role in dealing with the most vulnerable among us and at the most difficult times of our lives. When we're hurt at work or ending a marriage or behind on our bills, we turn to the courts. By default or neglect, they have become society's system for dealing with the disabled, with those who suffer from substance abuse, and the mentally ill. In fact, when you consider the significant role played by the courts, it seems obvious that this branch of government, even more than the others, must be open, honest, fair, and zealously guarded from the corrosive effects of money and political power. Unfortunately, as we've seen this afternoon, just the opposite seems to be true. This court has been unfortunately predictable. The Republican majority has virtually without exception catered to the wants of the few while ignoring the needs of the many, favored employers over employees. In fact, I'm sorry to say that by simply looking at the parties to a particular case, I can predict the winner without knowing much about the facts at all. Unions will lose. Workers will lose. Injured people will lose. Our air and water and public lands are for sale to the highest bidder. In my view, the choice this fall could not be clearer, nor the stakes higher. I've taken to telling my friends and colleagues in the environmental, social justice, or other community organizations that whatever they're working on, they need to stop. Because nothing they can do for their constituents can have a greater impact on their issues than shifting the majority of this court. So what do we do? Well, it's essential that we do all the things that we traditionally do. We need to raise money, we need to make phone calls and knock on doors, but we also need to recognize that 11 of the last 12 progressive candidates nominated for the Michigan Supreme Court have lost. So it's also clear that we need to do more. I plan to deliver this message for the next 5 months to whoever will listen. I know we'll be outspent. I know there'll be an endless stream of negative campaign ads calling these Democratic candidates every despicable thing you can think of. And because of that, I believe our only hope is reaching out to our neighbors and telling the honest truth about this court and what is at stake. We must build coalitions between labor, environmental, land use, social justice, and other progressive organizations to fight this fight. I plan to continue to remind those around me that the court belongs to the people, not corporations, and that democracy depends on a fair and impartial court system. And if they believe, as we do, that no one deserves an advantage because they gave a check to a politician, and when you stand in the courtrooms of this state, every citizen is on equal footing with the GMs, the Bank of Americas, the Coke Industries of the world, then they need to join our fight. If they believe that equality is not just a noble idea, but the foundation for a fair and civil society, they need to join our fight. The choice this fall is clear. The voters will be asked to choose between those who believe that access to the courts by the people is bad for business, and those who believe that access to the courts of this state is essential to democracy. This is a fight we need to fight. It is a fight that we need to win, and it's a fight that we can win. Thank you.